Hello everyone! Today I wanted to take you along for a painting process. And today I'll be painting something that I actually like to do every single year. It is actually the first painting that I ever posted to Instagram and kind of marks the beginning of when I started taking art a little more seriously. So it's something that is pretty special to me and I really like to keep up this tradition. However, I did not repaint it last year, and I don't want that to happen again. So I'm going to take today and maybe tomorrow to do this painting, and I'm going to take you along with me in real time. So to talk about my process a little, first I did the sketch on Procreate on my iPad, printed it, and then I transferred it over to some watercolor paper. I also want to admit this is not the first time I've done this. I actually almost filmed this entire video about a week ago and did not like the outcome, so I went back to stage one and completely redid the sketch, or at least the face of the sketch, and so now this is our new starting point. Hello, welcome to the voiceover. So I'm going to just talk a bit about my process here and kind of what my frame of thought was. This is still the same day that I did this painting, so it's all fresh in my head. Anyways, to start off, I almost always do a light wash of color. Sometimes I start with clear water, but here I just went ahead with some light yellow to bring some warmth into the piece. This is something I like to do at the beginning because it sort of just gives this tone that every color will take on that helps everything feel a bit more cohesive. And then while that paint is still wet, I add a little bit of, I guess, an underpainting. I just add some lighter variations of some of the colors that I'm going to use later to kind of set up a foundation. And because the paint is still wet, it really gives a nice soft and faded effect. We call this technique wet on wet, and it's really great for that really almost airbrushed look. Now, I did mention that this is my second attempt at this painting, and one of the mistakes I made last time was not really mapping out the red flowers and putting green there, and that led me to bringing in some gouache that kind of, I wouldn't say ruined, but changed the overall look I was going for. And after getting sort of the foundation for the background set up, I started to work on the figure, bringing in the color of the hair and the skin, and adding just a light amount of shading. I will be building on this later, but again, this is really just my first pass. I also want to mention that all the colors I am using here are variations of colors I used in the background. Or I guess I used the same colors to mix the colors that I used for the skin tone. For example, I used the yellows and the orange and red that I used for the flowers and the grass for the skin tone. And for the hair, I used the same red as the flowers, but I also added in a hint of a cooler pink just to change it up a little bit. I also didn't want the hair and the skin to be too similar in color, So that is a reason why I brought in that cooler pink tone. But I do bring that cooler pink tone into the flowers and into some of the shading later on. I guess what I'm trying to get at is that I tried to use a smaller color palette for this piece and really incorporating all of the colors a little bit everywhere to make sure that everything feels tied together in a neat little package, I guess. As I painted the skin for the rest of the figure, I really wanted the colors to almost fade at the bottom near the grass, because I really want to create the illusion that the figure is in the grass, that she is maybe in some slightly longer grass that sort of obscures her hands. I definitely did not choose that because I didn't want to draw hands. That's absolutely not why I made that decision. But that's also why I'm bringing more of that yellow into the skin, because it is the same yellow that I used in the grass tones. I apologize if that is a little repetitive, but I really want to hammer in how much it was a part of my thought process as I was painting. In the last painting, was a little more sporadic about my color choices, and it led to a piece that I wasn't proud of, so I was very intentional this time around. And the final, I guess, foundational pieces that I needed to do were the clothing. In pretty much every rendition of this painting and this girl that I've done, she has worn a yellow top. In the past, it's been a bit lighter, but lately I've been really wanting to lean into almost like a marigold or daffodil tone of yellow. And I really wanted it to be as warm as possible. And again, not to sound like a broken record, but I brought in some of the yellow from the background in this mix. As for the skirt, I want it to be blue, but because of the color surrounding it, I actually used some green tones. I also wanted it to come across almost like a vintage blue or a vintage wash. Almost like a more green toned blue, I guess I would say. And with this, I used some of the colors that I later use in the sky and the trees in the background, along with little dabs of yellow from the grass. I also wanted to add just a tiny bit of shading and darker spots where some of the shadows are going to be in the skirt. I used a slightly thicker paper for this painting, and one of the nice things about that is that the paint dries rather fast, So by the time I was done with the clothing, I was ready to go back and add some detail into the face. I was mostly just adding some light shading. Because the face is so small as far as painting goes, I tried to use a much firmer brush that I felt like I had a lot of control over, and I didn't want to overshade the skin. I wanted it to be soft, but also have almost some elements of a cell shading style with some harder shadows. Really, my goal here was just to add a little bit of dimension and emotion to the face. It was actually the face in the previous painting that I did that really frustrated me. It was not what I wanted it to be, and something just felt off the whole time. And it's why, even though I had all the footage, the voiceover, and actually almost the whole video edited, it was actually looking back at the footage that I just decided, I'm not proud of this. I think I should do this again because I know I can do a better job. And after reworking the sketch, I'm very happy that I did that because I'm much more pleased with the face that I have here. And really just the overall feel of the piece. It kind of felt like the first piece was a rough draft, and then this was actually the real go at it. I also did a lot more planning after the first one, and I took the lessons that I learned and applied it here, and I think that's another reason why I end up liking the outcome a lot more. And unfortunately, this tends to be a trend for me with paintings. I almost never paint something once and like it. I almost always have to paint it twice, and sometimes even 3 times before I end up with something that I actually vibe with, I guess. Something that I actually feel proud of. Now it's time to really put in the detail into the background. I honestly have found grass to be sort of my nemesis in the past. I never know how much detail to add and how much just to imply with, I guess, light washes of paint. But after my first go, I decided I wanted some more detailed bits, especially up against the figure, and a few strokes here or there. But I wanted most of it to be implied through the texture of the paint. It's actually something that I very much overdid in my first attempt, and looking at earlier stages of the painting, I realized that I really wanted a much softer look for the grass, and that means that I do not need to paint every single blade. For some reason though, this has always been a bit tough for me. I can never quite find that balance of, I guess, individual blades and just green that implies grass is there. It's kind of one reason that I tend to struggle with how I like to render foliage in general. However, I feel like here I got much closer to that balance that I strive for. After taking care of the grass, I decided to tackle the trees in the background, and I made sure to make the trees that were closer to the viewer just a little bit darker, and the trees in the background to be light and almost imperceptible. Usually it's best to have the things closer to the viewer be darker and more saturated, as it helps really get across that it is in fact closer to the viewer. and that the things in the background are further away and beginning to fade. I guess it's supposed to replicate our own eyesight, and it's something that I occasionally forget to add to my pieces, but it really helps add to the depth, making it not feel so flat and two-dimensional, and having the figure almost seem like she's actually in a place and not in a backdrop. This is something that I've struggled with in my paintings for quite a while, and something I'm really trying to overcome as I really try to incorporate more backgrounds and storytelling. Now, after this, I decided to do another light yellow wash, although it started off kind of green, over the whole piece. I did also make sure to clean my brush in between spaces so that I didn't bring any leftover traces of green or blue over the figure. This was mostly successful, and by dabbing up some of the paint that didn't quite translate well, I was able to add even more warmth to the piece. The only downside to this is it did, I guess, soften some of the shadows that I wanted to be a little sharper. So I did end up going through, probably off camera, to add some of the shadows that had been there in the past. This is also where I start adding just a little more dimension to the grass and finally adding the pop of red to those flowers. This was really something I was excited to do. And I don't know, I just love adding a pop of color, especially this like orangey red. I also wanted to add just a little more texture to the trees and also finally paint in a few blades of grass and a couple of leaves. I wanted this tone to just be a little different, but then fade into the more, I guess, yellow-green tone of the grass. I also want to give a quick apology that I did not include more footage of some of these smaller details, but for some reason it is almost impossible to film them without the camera getting out of focus or my entire hand just blocking it. That's kind of just how it is, especially with some of these smaller parts of the painting. But to explain what I'm doing here, I was taking some darker paint and kind of adding that dimension back in and trying to imply some more shadows so that the piece actually has some contrast and isn't just the same, I guess, shade the whole way through, so that there's actually lights and darks. Now for my favorite part, and what honestly helps me feel a lot better about the piece, kind of actually brings it all together, is adding in some line work. I've always never quite known how I want to pursue line work, if I want it to have no line work, if I want it to be very sharp and detailed line work. But lately I've settled on using colored pencil for the line work, so I can add that sharpness where I want it, especially where there are darker shadows, like by her legs on the skirt. And I have a lot of control over the line weight and variation. And because I have a lot of colored pencils, I can kind of vary up the color depending on what subject matter I am doing. So for these flowers, I'm using more of a red tone. For the skin, I used a bit more of a brown tone. And for other places, I used a green or a blue. It helps me add some... Man, I'm really trying to think of a word that's not depth. But it really helps that outline feel softer and it doesn't feel too harsh. In the past, I have used ink, and that does work for some pieces, and I have managed to make ink look softer, but because I wanted this to have a lot of like softness, not just in the style, but in the atmosphere and the feeling, I really didn't want to bring any harsher line work in, especially because it's not really present anywhere else. So that is why the colored pencil is really helpful. And at the end, I use a little colored pencil just to add in a tiny bit of shading and highlights. And now it's time for me to stop rambling and show you how it all turned out in the end. Overall, I'm very happy that I decided to do this one again, that I was able to upkeep that tradition, and honestly, I'm very pleased with the outcome. So to my own surprise, I finished this in one sitting, one morning. Maybe I could have made it more detailed and taken longer, but I'm happy with where it's at and that it is maintaining a softer atmosphere. Anyways, I am hungry. I need to go eat something, but I wanted to say thank you if you've made it this far. Let me know if you like this longer form painting content without the speed being upped. Just let me know what your opinion is on that, if you prefer the longer or the shorter painting videos. And with that, I will see you all next time. Bye everyone!